So I mentioned when I watched through The Robots of Death that at the end of it I was left a little underwhelmed. I had heard people say that The Robots of Death is kind of like Doctor Who does a murder mystery. And I admit it was okay, but I wasn't necessarily overwhelmed by The Robots of Death. What was I looking for? Well, that was covered more in the next story of Doctor Who, The Talons of Weng-Chiang. A six-part story first broadcast between the 26th of February to the 2nd of April 1977. The sixth and final serial of season 14. Now, two things that I'd heard about this. One is that it is also more of a kind of murder mystery, whereas the Robots of Death was more kind of based around kind of Agatha Christie style. This one is more kind of Arthur Conan Doyle. The other thing that I'd heard about this was that this was an episode that some people did consider one of the greats, but it's also one of the most controversial ep- stories in all of Doctor Who. So I was a little hesitant about approaching this one, but I thought, I'll give it a try. So the Fourth Doctor, played once again by Tom Baker, takes his companion Leela, played once again by Louise Jameson, to show her the entertainment of her ancestors. So he takes her back to Victorian England in an attempt to take her to the theatre. However, when they arrive in Victorian England, they find mysterious things going on. Young women are going missing, bodies are showing up in the Thames, and it all seems to be centered around a mysterious Chinese magician known as Li Sen-Chang, played by John Bennett. Chang, unbeknownst to them, Chang is actually in league with, well, several people. He's got a kind of army of minions, but then he's working for a mysterious person calling himself Weng-Chiang, a masked figure, simply after a Chinese god. In reality, Weng-Chiang is actually a criminal from the 51st century known as Magnus Greel, and is voiced by Michael Spice. So really, the three things that the Doctor has to do with, one is Chang and his minions, the other is Weng-Chiang, I mean Magnus Greel, and the third is a robot called Mr. Sin, who is played here by Deep Roy. I admit, when I heard the name Deep Roy, I was like, where have I heard that before? And then I realised that Deep Roy portrayed the Oompa Loompas in the 2005 remake of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So, he's had an up and down career. So, yeah, you've got Weng-Chiang, Li Sen-Chang, and the sinister Mr. Sin. Now, why is this seen as a particularly controversial episode? Well, there are two complaints I heard people say about it. One is a fairly minor thing, and the other is a bit more. The minor thing was that, as part of Weng-Chiang's plots, he plans to essentially, well, from what I understand, drain the life force from various women in order to kind of keep himself going. At least I think that's what he's doing. It's hard to tell. And he's done experiments down in the sewers beneath London, and one of those experiments is a giant rat, which you can see chases after the Doctor and Leela throughout the story. Which people say the giant rat effect is a bit, it's a little bit kind of weird, a little bit bad, but well, I think we can forgive it. I mean, Doctor Who had plenty of bad effects back in the 70s, 80s, hell, even parts of the 60s. So, yeah, I think I can forgive them for that. The other one that's a little harder to overlook in today's PG landscape is the yellow face. Now, this is one that I have seen some people say it was the 70s and it's kind of representative of the time. Others have a bit more problem with it, and it's, for those who don't know, it's the practice of white actors portraying people of, in this case, Chinese characters. So I have heard that back in Victorian times this was a thing that some people did. Back in Victorian England, there were occasionally people who dressed up as Chinese people and did Chinese magic acts. However, that clearly wouldn't fly in today's more PG landscape. And John Bennett, I admit, he does a great job with what he's given. There is there is a slight undertone throughout the whole thing of, I mean, as I said, I've heard people claim this is one of the best Doctor Who stories that they ever saw, and I've heard people say it was quite scary back for them in the 70s. And I can see that. I definitely can see that. You're always kind of having to ask yourself those, should this have been done? Well, you're always kind of debating with yourself whether it truly works. I mean, whether they could have gotten away with it or whether they should have left it alone. But you know what? I personally watched the entire thing and I enjoyed it. That's, but to help them throughout all of this, it's not just the villains they have to deal with. They also end up running into the owner of the theatre, Henry Gordon Jago, played by Christopher Benjamin, and a professor who helps them along the way, who's kind of an art collector called Professor Lightfoot, played by Trevor Baxter. Now, Christopher Benjamin, he is actually one that I'm glad to bring up here, because Christopher Benjamin is one of the few actors who actually has appeared in both Classic Who and New Who. He appears here as Henry Gordon Jago, the owner of the theatre, but then he would also pop up in the 2008 episode The Unicorn and the Wasp, one of my guilty pleasure episodes, as Hugh Kirbishley. And this was evidently a popular story throughout the entire thing, because it did actually launch a Big Finish spin-off titled Jago and Lightfoot, which ran on Big Finish from 2010 to 2017. So it was evidently popular. From what I understand of it, and from what I saw in the episode, and presuming in the series Lightfoot is more like the Sherlock Holmes character, he seemed to kind of a lot more sure of himself introducing things, whereas Jago seemed a bit more kind of unsure and a bit scared in some situations, so I presume he's more like the Watson, but I can't be sure of that. But as I said, while I felt a little underwhelmed by the Robots of Death, the Talons of Weng-Chiang I felt was a great episode, especially seeing the Doctor go full-on detective. I mean, there may have been undertones of that in the Robots of Death, but seeing him go detective in this story, along with the Deerstalker cap and everything, I felt it was a jolly good fun to watch. I mean, just while I know that when he left Doctor Who, Tom Baker would end up playing a version of Sherlock Holmes, from what I understand, I felt you could see the undertones here of it, and he does do very well. I mean, this I did feel once again like I was watching a piece of Doctor Who history. There's a part that I was a bit unsure about, of course, with the Chinese characters, but you know what? In today's more PG landscape, it probably wouldn't fly, but for a cute story from the 1970s, I actually feel Talons of Weng-Chiang is one of the Doctor Who greats, and I did find myself enjoying it a whole way through. I mean, do I feel there are some elements that wouldn't fly? Maybe, but you know what? For a story from the 70s, I think the Talons of Weng-Chiang is another great classic. So I urge you, if you haven't seen it yet, give it a check out. So, will my next Doctor Who story from the classic era be? Well, I've got two on the way, but I won't mention anything just yet. Anyway, until next time, see ya.